Zimbabwe Exemption Permit holders have 3 months left before the extension expires. Government had announced that it will terminate the permits on the 30th of June. About 180,000 permit holders will be affected, some of them children who were born in South Africa. Earlier, my colleague Hugo Ribatika spoke to the Helen Suzman Foundation's director, Nicole Fritz.
There have been large numbers of children born to these 178,000 Zimbabwe Exemption Permit holders, right? And they know no other home but South Africa. And so to require them essentially to return to Zimbabwe or to be rendered undocumented is to impose enormous consequences, detrimental consequences on their education, on their access to social services here. But as you say, it's not just the children or the Zimbabwean Exemption Permit holders themselves. This decision is, we maintain, and has been taken without consideration of the ecosystem, the communities in which they are involved. So it's, as you say, persons who hold jobs but are part of communities who are running business and have created jobs themselves. And so without a proper process of consultation, you don't know exactly what the consequences are going to be, not only to the Zimbabwe Exemption Permit holders themselves, but the ecosystems, the communities in which they live, the detrimental consequences to them by simply excising them from the body politic of South Africa, as it were.
Tomorrow, the case will be heard in the court. This is what Nicole Fritz had to say about the challenge against Home Affairs.
We, at the time that the termination was first announced, we launched our application, as did the other parties. So this court action has been in place since the termination was first announced. And we have really battled to try and secure the earliest possible court date, because we fully appreciate the chaos that is going to, and the uncertainty that so many Zimbabwean Exemption Permit holders, we recognize that it would be far better for them to know the outcome of this court case earlier so that they could plan for their lives accordingly.
The Pretoria High Court will be seized with this matter from tomorrow, the 11th, until the 14th of April. We take a look now at what the court will consider in making a decision. We're joined by legal expert Elton Hart. Elton, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Perhaps a brief background in terms of how we got to this point.
Now, obviously, there was I think the legislation was around 2014. Where the then Minister of Home Affairs then issued special permits to people from Zimbabwean descent to actually work, study and do business in South Africa as long as they comply with our local laws and regulations. And these would include people that's normally even unlawful or illegal in the country, as long as we have never declared them undesirable. That's where this thing actually started, of these ZEP permits that is held by descendants or Zimbabwean nationals at this point in time. That's where we started, and obviously this thing does not necessarily match up and give you the rights as given in the Constitution, but it affords you certain rights.
And what will then the courts be seized with? Because this was initially a temporary measure, the ZEP?
No, obviously what the court will need to look at, this decision by the now Minister of Home Affairs, Dr. Aaron Motsoaledi. He has now said, okay, we're going to terminate. And first they said termination date was 30 June 2023. I see now lately they've extended it till 31 December 2023 for people to make applications for waiver, or to actually get some sort of a visa, a work visa, and it's like the general work visas. But what the court will be seized with, the legal question of the court will be seized with the question to check whether the minister's decision was lawful and reasonable. And the court will also look at the relevant provisions of the Immigration Act coupled with the regulations to the Immigration Act. And that speaks to Section 31 of the Act and Regulation 9 of the Immigration Regulation. So that is why they will now have to look at, was there compliance with legal principles, the constitutional rights. And remember, our Constitution says every person has certain rights, which means it extends to any person that's in the country. It doesn't say all South Africans, it says a person. So which means the Zimbabwean nationals are persons, and they then automatically qualify for these rights in our Constitution. And then we also need to see in terms of administrative law, is this decision complying with PAJA? Because we can then know if the minister's decision was irrational, they can take it on review using the tools in PAJA.
What determines rationality? You mentioned that the courts will take a look at whether the decision by Home Affairs was lawful and reasonable. So what determines reasonable and rational?
So the court will look at what was the minister's reasons for saying, okay, I'm now going to terminate. And this would go back to the 2014 decision. What made the then minister to say, I'm going to give this special permit to Zimbabwean citizens or Zimbabwean nationals by descent? What made? So the court will look at what gave rise to that decision and what gave rise to taking away that rights now, because this permit is a little bit more special for the Zimbabweans because it allows them to go to South African schools, it allows them access to the healthcare facilities and some basic other services, and also to actually work in South Africa. And that is the rights now that is going to terminate, and that obviously is a constitutional right of a person. So the minister or the court will have to look at and say the decision then to give them what sort of have sparked that decision, what informed that decision, and the decision now to terminate, to say we're going to now, just in 6 months' time, we're going to take away these rights that these people had, and some of them who has been living here since date of birth is now taken away from them. So that is what the court will be seized with. And then the court will have to now match it to our constitution to see, does this meet constitutional muster? Does this decision of the minister actually is within reasonable grounds? Because our constitution say you can limit a person's rights. But the minister, the court will now look at, was this limitation justifiable? Is there some public policy or public interest that the minister's decision is trying to protect? Because obviously they look at a smaller group's rights compared to the bigger South Africa's rights, and they would match it up. And that's how the courts will have to now actually unpack this decision to see if this is something that they need to interfere with.
With that said, what are the prospects of success for the applicants?
No, it's always like it's a 50-50 chance that the court can say. It depends on what was the minister's rationale. And obviously now, at this point in time, it's not out in the open. The papers is like, you see snippets of what is being said in the court challenge. You don't see everything, so you can't really say. So it's a 50-50 chance, but I think the courts might eventually come and say that, yes, there is alternatives to the Zimbabwean nationals, like to say, you can apply for a general work visa, you can apply for a study visa, you can apply for a business visa, or you can also, as a retired person, you can apply for that, or you can even take the decision by the minister on review. So you have other legal remedies at your disposal, and it's not like we're going to say, pack up your stuff and go. It's just go now, go comply with the immigration laws, and then get the necessary documents, and you'll still be able to work, do business, or study in South Africa, or even stay in South Africa as a retired person. But just please use now our current prevailing legislation, which is the Immigration Act, and no longer the ZEP permits, because that was something special that the minister or the then minister did. So the courts might be more to the government side to say, listen here, because we do have this legislation, we feel like you should use the legislation to make your stay in South Africa lawful.
Thank you very much to Elton Hart. He's a legal expert.